So, my guests today, we've got some wonderful ones. We have James Butcher, CEO of Supply Pilot. We have Joanna Gluzman, Chief Sustainability Officer at Cussons. And we have Sheri, Hinish, Principal Global Sustainability Innovation and Ecosystems Leader at EY. So please welcome James, Joanna and Sheri. Hello to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us today. We've got a lot to get through over the next 25 minutes, so we will crack straight on if we can with our first set of questions. And it's such a huge issue though. In your opinion, why though is it so important to engage senior leaders with your sustainability efforts?
Do you want me to go first?
Absolutely.
So my position, as you say, is Chief Sustainability Officer, and I report to the CEO. And the reason this is structured this way is because in many companies I've worked in before, and many of my colleagues, if sustainability is not taken seriously at the top, it's very difficult to achieve the goals you have set out to achieve. So the first important thing is that goals are company goals. They are all encompassing across all the areas of the company. I've been in places where sustainability was buried underneath the R&D structure, or in marketing, or in communications, or in HR. And then every goal you set becomes a goal for that particular department, but not necessarily conducive to achieving as a whole group. So I think that's really important to really get the buy-in from the CEO, CFO, and the board to make sure things happen. And that happens because as senior management, you mentioned sustainability more in town hall meetings, internal, external communications. It's easier to monitor. So your leadership team has a duty to monitor the progress against the goals you have set, as does the board. But it's also really important on a strategic level for a company that takes sustainability seriously to take this in considerations in mergers and acquisitions or disposals. So when you set a goal around plastics, for example, you don't end up disposing of an asset that is going to set you back, or acquiring an asset that's going to set you back. So it needs to be a strategic activity where everybody is involved. That's my viewpoint. My colleagues might have something to add.
Yeah, I'd echo what you said, Joanna, in terms of the clients that we work with. I often draw the parallel with health and safety. It says, health and safety is not a department's job, it's everybody's job in a business. But it starts from the top down. And I think for sustainability to be successful, it's the same. Sustainability needs to be in everybody's job, whatever they're doing, whether they be thinking how they're sustainable sourcing or how they're developing a new product. And ultimately that cross-functional embracing of something has to start from the top. Probably if I could, I'd probably just challenge the language of buy-in, because it's not just the buying into, but leading from the top. I mean, they've got to live it, believe it. Boards will become increasingly accountable for it and the many facets of sustainability. But therefore, it's not just like any other element of strategy. It's got to start around the boardroom. But I think just being possibly a little bit precise with the language, it's really important that they're engaged, but not that then becomes a job for the leaders. Sustainability's got to be a job for everybody. And I think that parallel to health and safety is one that every business will have lived through in the last 20 years, and working out how to make that everybody's challenge, internally and down into the supply chain, etc. I think that's where sustainability needs to go if it's going to be successful in the same way as we've been with health and safety.
James, I love that parallel. Sheri, your thoughts?
Yeah, I can just add two additional flavors. I think resource allocation, we haven't heard about funding, but funding is critical. And by setting the tone at the top, engaging senior leaders cross-functionally, as both Joanna and James have mentioned, you really make sure that you have the adequate resourcing allocated to support a lot of these bold ambitions, not only just sustainability initiatives, but true end-to-end business transformation. And that includes more broadly things outside of your four walls. And last, culture change in talent capacity. I think that, it's really important for leaders to help create that culture that values sustainability and encourages employees to also walk the talk in their daily lives, not only within the workplace, but then also helping them make more responsible decisions in the world that we share.
I'll pick up on the use of the word culture there, because I think that is absolutely crucial. James, Joe, would you absolutely agree that it has to be that fundamental? It can't just be something that's reported on occasionally or mentioned or lip surface paid to. It needs to be absolutely hardwired into every bit of the business.
I'd certainly, and that's why I use the health and safety one. It's not sure how much it comes through on screen, but quite a few grey hairs. I remember where people did just report on the number of accidents in their business, and now people understand that actually, one accident's too many, and everyone's got this zero accident culture, and that's the important word that Sheri uses, like that culture, that mindset of we must be safe, and therefore we've got to have that sustainability culture that we are taking the right decisions. And that actually cuts back to other things that Sheri mentioned, such as funding, for example, because if it's business wide, then you can tap into the assets and the resources within other businesses, other parts of the business, and motivate your suppliers and those outside your four walls, because it becomes embedded in product development. Or Joanna, you mentioned things like sustainable packaging. It's everybody's thinking about that, and therefore actually sustainability doesn't have to cost as much as people think often if it's ingrained. If it's a satellite department's being created, actually funding and resourcing is really hard, and it's really hard for that department to then change culture, which brings us back to that point at the top. It's got to start from the top.
Well, James, as a consultancy, you've led me on very nicely to the next point I wanted to go into. For you, what are some of the biggest challenges you see as a consultancy with engaging senior leadership? How are leaders responding? What are the blockers for actually really being put into action on a day-to-day level?
I think there's two buckets. One that's around the scale and complexity of the issue, and the other is concerns over resource and cost. If I take that first one, solving big issues like global deforestation, solving climate, etc. They're huge issues, and the way we've taught business leadership for many decades now, you need to be able to say, I'm going to spend this money this year, and I'm going to have this impact typically in a 2, 3, 4 year time frame. And now we've got people having to write strategies through to 2040, 2050. How are they going to make huge change? And actually, I think that the scale of that complexity is actually causing inertia. People kind of going, actually, do I really want to buy this system? Whatever, is it going to be the right platform for in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? Because things are so evolving so quickly. So the biggest thing that we have to talk about is actually it's about taking the first steps. The longest journey starts with the first step, and other such phrases. Saying, actually, I'm going to start making an impact. I'm going to start making a difference. And be agile in some of that, and not necessarily looking at what the system might need to be in 5 years, 10 years' time, doing what's necessary now.
As you say, that's
I think that dovetails with the other side, which is cost. So there's two things. There's, people don't have to be looking at what the 10-year investment in some of these things are. It's what can I do this year? How can I start making a difference? Incremental and marginal gains. I talk a lot about marginal gain theory, but sustainability doesn't have to cost. Sustainability, when I was learning as an engineer, was talked about as resource efficiency. I think it's a phrase that we should rediscover here across industry. Resource efficiency is about not wasting stuff, and basically, if I don't waste stuff, whether that be one-time use packaging, unnecessary shipping, etc., resource efficiency is normally dovetailed precisely with being more sustainable and using the limited resources we have. So, those are the barriers. It's that concern about the scale of it and the costs, and I think it's about reducing it back to things that we can manage, and then can fit within the traditional management paradigm that we have today.
Okay, James. Sheri, I'll come to you next on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to just piggyback on what James alluded to. I think that the resistance to change, sometimes it's that hyperbolic discounting, so focused on short-term financial goals rather than long-term sustainability goals. And it can really make it difficult to implement any long-term practice that requires significant investment and change. Also, I think when you have limited resources, and we all are, suffering through some economic headwinds right now, sustainability transformation, it really does require a longer term thinking. When he alluded to how do you, make the business case or operationalize it, I think some of the more classic waste streams, using lean cost savings through improved operational efficiencies is one angle, but then it gets more sophisticated, I think, when we think about creating value to society through net positive impact. 2030, 2050, 100 years from now, for my great grandchildren, for example, this is really going to require a lot of system thinking, re-engineering, business as usual models with increased innovation, and really using innovation technology for the things that I think we're all after. That's why we're all tuned in now for Sustainability Live. There's also more pragmatic things that James alluded to, stronger financial valuation through transparent ESG reporting, for example, to lower your cost of capital. And then the other side, increase loyalty. The customers love you, your key trading partners love you, people love you, you have better recruitment, retention, morale of your employees. All of these things wrapped together, I think, really can help mitigate some of the barriers in the C-suite to, proving that this is the path forward, and we can't wait. It's an emergency. We have to start now.
I mean, be interested to see what Joe says in a moment from a brand's perspective, but I think, again, just doubling down on that, I completely agree, Sheri, and it's framing the fact that you've got to do both things. Most companies are going to have to fundamentally rethink their business model over the next 20, 30 years, whether it be moving to rental economy for things, whether it be trying to own their own supply chains to become circular. So they've got to do that, but that system thinking is challenging and will often take quite a long time for people to work out, and will take a lot of collaboration across between sectors often. And that's, for me, is the thing that says that's causing inertia, stopping people doing the things they can do today. It's almost kind of and it's just, make hay in the meantime. I can be doing more green energy now. I can be reducing waste now. I can be doing more sustainable packaging now. And it's actually being able to, it's almost like two separate board discussions is what's sustainability mean in the next 3 years and what does sustainability mean in the next 30 years. And I think the bit that I see that I think is most worrying is that there's a lot of people trying to do that systems thinking piece and missing the proverbial low-hanging fruit in the meantime, and actually not getting started.
Well,
So,
James, you are speaking about time, which makes me conscious of the time that we have on this discussion. So if I can just move things along back to Joe quickly. A lot of what we've been talking about is affecting change, and to affect change, you need influence. How do you go about influencing a board to go about making those sustainable decisions? Because we can talk a lot, and I want everyone to go away from today's event with things they can actually do, things that they can do differently, different ways they can approach things. For you, how do you try to get that influence at a board level to see those kind of changes?
So that's a great question. And actually, it brings me to what James just said about the two agendas, the short term, the long term, and how boards are looking and zooming out. So the importance of getting the board on board is really to be able to zoom out and look at the bigger picture, the investment that needs to be made, and long-term decisions for the business. I've been very fortunate. My board is very engaged. But when I joined, there wasn't an ESG committee. We had to start working on the structures of how to govern all ESG matters. And I think that's something that's really, really important, that the board understands the various topics they need to have oversight on, but also the mandatory reporting, such as TCFD. That's a new requirement in Europe, in the UK. The Task Force of Climate Financial Disclosure. And boards just at the moment, most boards don't understand what those things mean in terms of their reporting requirements, but also what they need to plan for the long term. And so, as I said, in my case, I've been very fortunate. But again, there's a lot of work to discuss with the board, the short-term plan versus the long-term plan. As James said, we can't neglect either. They have to happen in parallel. What low-hanging fruit can we pick now and invest in, and what we want to see in 5 to 10 years' time?
Sheri, you seem to be very much agreeing there. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do agree, because I think this is all about people making different choices. And when you think about the board, I think right now is driven by this big word called transparency, that now we have to be transparent about things, our business operations, documenting a proof of performance, and things. You can no longer just have financial KPIs. It's the non-financial KPIs, which ESG reporting, a lot of the frameworks that are emerging, some that have already been hardened. It's no longer a nice to have. You have to do it. And it's not just for the cost of capital. It's also for a lot of other things like market position, growth, looking at customer retention, employee retention, the future of your organization and your business. So if you're not thinking through this lens, I don't know that you'll be around in 10 years. I don't think you will.
Well, Sheri, if I can extend that lens, we were talking about the influence at your own business at board level. For you, what are the most critical aspects of looking at sustainability within a supply chain you're connected to? Because you can have a huge amount of influence in this sprawling web of businesses that are connected to you.
Yeah, I don't know that it's much different. I think that there are three things that are sort of the overarching challenges and opportunities: the climate emergency, social inequities, and the business model emergency. And what I often find, because we're talking about the board or the C-suite, there's a lot of due diligence and compliance, but the other sort of marrying that is choice. So due diligence and choice are really two key factors that you can use to drive trust in a system, in an industry, in an organization. And this is all about driving trust to promote things like accountability in your supply chain, transparency, personal responsibility. And I think that very first step in a maturity continuum for sustainable supply chain or sustainability more broadly is that the company actually takes the time to conduct that due diligence and implement best practices, leading practices, and communicate their performance to their stakeholders, to the board, and to others, because you're more likely to be trusted and respected by customers, investors, and employees. I think the other side of that too is, we can get into the nitty-gritty in a second, but it really takes that tone from the top that my colleagues have mentioned, because it's everyone's business. And you have to believe wherever you are in the supply chain or your organization, there's a better way and a more responsible future, and that you have the ability to act and make a difference, because that is what equates to shared accountability. Getting into, the things that I see, that I talk to customers about, design, we need to rethink. Okay. Everything that is happening right now in the world is based on a 1984 playbook, and that we have designed all of the effects that we're seeing right now real time. Rethinking your network strategy, rethinking product design, rethinking supplier selection through this ESG lens. Second, technology and talent foundation. You really need to invest in technologies that are going to enable the type of orchestration, flexibility, and most importantly, inform new decisions, new responsible decisions. What's that next best action? It's not just enough to see it. The other side of that is it's really about people. Like you have to make sure you have the right people in your organization. I mentioned that they have to feel like they're a part of something much bigger than themselves. That's going to take skills. It's going to take culture transformation, and most importantly, domain expertise to execute. Funding, we've already hit on. You have to finance the gap. I mean, especially when you reach back beyond tier 1 or 2. There are a lot of suppliers that are really struggling to wrap their arms around it. A lot of it's awareness and capacity building, education, but then the other is how are you helping them and going further with them as one.
Absolutely.
Environmental
If I
impact.
could stop
I
you,
mean, we can
sorry.
talk about,
We could
that
talk for a long
social and
time.
ethical considerations, going together, continuous improvement. These are all things that folks need to be focused on when they really want to get into the most critical aspects of a sustainable supply chain.
Okay, we are very, very nearly out of time. So I'll come to you all very, very, very quickly, just in 20 seconds or so. If you're going to give one piece of advice to any sustainability leaders who are trying to implement sustainability policies and are experiencing resistance, very quickly, what one bit of advice would you give them? And James, I'll come to you first.
I'd say it's not a sustainability issue, it's a business issue. Everything that Sheri just said there, if people don't act upon these, they're not going to have a business. So irrespective of what their motives are, businesses have to do this from the top, engaging all the way down to their supply chain.
Okay. Joe?
I'd say, in addition to what James said, run a very comprehensive materiality review to understand what's material to your business and to your stakeholders, and focus on the 3 to 5 topics that can deliver real impact through your business.
Okay, and Sheri, I'm afraid you have to go last on this one.
Tone at the top, buzz at the bottom, and longer arms for a bigger hug. That's what you need to be successful in transformational sustainability.
That's fantastic. I need that on a mug or a t-shirt, one or the other. That is fantastic. All of you, thank you so much. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, but I think we keep on returning to the ideas of culture change, not just buying, but actually hardwiring it into a business, because it's not a sustainability issue, it is a business issue. Thank you all so much. James, Joe, Sheri, it's been an absolute pleasure.